Seahawks fans, wherever you may be, thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, Seahawks fans, welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers, here to talk Seahawks football. We're going to do a 53-man roster prediction show today. It's our 7th annual show doing so. Some are easier than others, I should say. This one was a little tough just because we have a pretty decent roster as far as depth, and there's going to be some guys that are going to be impacted on the fringes of that roster, and there's going to be some roster manipulations, injuries come into play, etc. We're going to talk about it all. Welcome in.
Yeah, this was a hard one. Last year, and most years it's like 48 or 49 of the 53 seems obvious, and then it's okay, who else made the team, or I'm putting these guys on there, but I kind of expect the team to sign in someone else's salary cap casualty and replace them. This year I was struggling not to cut a lot of guys, and there's guys that I did not want on the cut list that ended up on the cut list. It was a really challenging activity this year round.
I think the impact came when Jordan Brooks and Jamal Adams were added back onto the roster, right? In the last couple of weeks, it really made an impact on a few different players. We'll talk about all of that. Injuries come into play on this thing. Let's go over some guys that are currently injured in some capacity or another that may dictate the way that the maneuvers are done. We can talk about those. There's some roster tricks that you can do, quote unquote, that have been employed before that will certainly come into play, I think, in this situation, at least on a couple different players, and we'll talk about those. Injury-wise, in this game, Devin Bush had a concussion. Don't know what the condition is yet, whether it's a minor deal, he's going to be back in 3 or 4 days, or if it's a longer-term situation where it could take a few weeks, and that may impact a roster spot. It's not going to jeopardize him being on the roster long-term, but they could do a few things around that.
Because if they don't think they're going to have him week 1, that may lead them to wanting to keep an extra inside linebacker.
Yes.
On the roster, but that means losing someone else.
That we're talking about is if Devin Bush is going to make the team, you're going to have him on the 53-man roster when it's turned in on Tuesday at 1 p.m. Pacific time, which is the cut down date and time. He needs to be on the roster for 24 hours before he could revert over to a PUP list, which would be a minimum games missed of 4, and then he could return anytime after that. And you can go down the list on a few other injury things that we'll talk about, but that's essentially how it works. When he goes to the PUP list after making the initial roster,
well, it would be IR,
24 hours. IR,
not the PUP.
And he could go on there. That would open up a roster spot, so anybody that you did initially cut could then come back onto the 53, or a player from another team, for example. So that's kind of what we're talking about here.
And there's also things that the Seahawks have done in the past. A couple of years ago, they cut Geno Smith, and he didn't go anywhere. It was just for that 24-hour thing, and they already had, his contract worked out with his agent. It was like, hey, we want to do this. Will you help us? And Geno was like, sure, why not? But they can't really do that with Geno now because of his contract and the way now he's a starting quarterback. They've only got a couple of guys on this roster that would be candidates for that, like Artie Burns and Mario
guys.
Edwards.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
And these are guys that you'd have to, when you do that, I mean, they are not under contract. They could be signed by someone else. But
if they have an agreement in hand, handshake deal, usually that's pretty good. Unless a guy like Artie Burns, for example, is promised a starting spot somewhere else, or a top 4 position in a defensive backfield where he could get serious playing time.
Or where someone comes in, saw what he did, and they're like, okay, we'll give you more than the veteran minimum. We'll make it $1.5 million. And then he's like, why would I not take that? And honestly, why would he not take that? He
Right.
should. So there's that.
So yeah. So when you see the in the real deal, you see some of the cuts. Don't be surprised on a couple of names. Doesn't mean it's permanent. It could be definitely just a roster trick to get manipulate the deal, and we'll see how that goes. Joey Blount had a shoulder AC sprain as well. Not sure the severity of both Derek Hall and Joey Blount have similar injuries. I'm going to list out some players initially, and then we'll go through the entire roster. I'm going to list out some players initially that could revert to short-term IR after the 53-man roster has been set. So these guys would initially make the roster and then go to IR after a 24-hour period that would open up spots for, guys like Artie Burns, Mario Edwards that were initially cut that you bring back, or guys that are fringy, Levi Bell, Patrick O'Connell, other players. Kenny McIntosh has been out for a long time with a knee. They don't expect him out forever. They want him to probably make this roster, so he's going to make the initial 53. He could be a guy that they could do this with. Derek Young, abductor tear, we don't know. He might go on permanent IR, be out for the season, but they could also do a short term as well. Brian Monet, don't know where he's at on his ACL recovery. Sounds like it's long term, but it could be something that they could expect back mid-season, and they may want to do that since their defensive tackle room is fairly weak. Cameron Young, calf strain, hasn't really played in the preseason at all. He's had that calf strain for a while, but they don't anticipate him being out for the whole year as well. Derek Hall, we mentioned him earlier. Devin Bush, Vi Jones has an ankle injury. It's kept him out of the entire preseason, but they really like him. Joey Blount, and then Jamal Adams. Maybe Jamal Adams has gone through some walkthroughs, but they still expect him to be 3 or 4 weeks before he's really ready. He may, be a candidate for this as well. So I just want to put those out there because as we go through this, we've got some tough decisions to make, and those sorts of moves help us kind of build the roster long term. Okay, so let's just start up at the top. We kind of know these are set at quarterback, Geno Smith and Drew Lock.
Yep. Ideally, you'd like to keep a guy like Ehlers around, and I think they do on the practice squad, but there just isn't room on a 53-man roster for a third quarterback this year.
Agreed. Yeah, I think he's a good practice squad candidate. He had 159 yards in preseason, 16 of 27, also picked up 76 yards on 15 carries. He's definitely a practice squad candidate. If they like another quarterback from another roster that was cut better than him as far as upside, maybe they could go take a look and poke around a little bit. But I would anticipate he's the guy initially signed to a practice squad spot. Running backs, what do you got?
I've got Walker, Charbonnet, Dallas, and McIntosh making the initial 53, and I've got Thompson Jr. On the practice squad. And if McIntosh does go to IR after 24 hours of being on the 53, they would just bring Thompson back.
I see it exactly the same way. That's exactly what I wrote down. Wide receivers, I've got Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, and Jigba. And then I've got Jake Bobo on there as well. I've also got Cody Thompson and Aesop Winston in that room. I've got, so that makes 6 total wide receivers on my roster. Keith, Cade Johnson, Lindsey Landers didn't make it. I've got Derek Young landing on IR with an abductor strain. I think he's gone for the year. And then Dwayne Eskridge is suspended for 6 games, so he doesn't count on this deal.
This is getting boring. We have the same stuff. Like literally, I thought Aesop Winston Jr., I thought you'd argue with me about Matt Landers and all of that. But honestly, he was the better player throughout preseason and offers more in terms of, special teams and that kind of stuff. So he made the roster there. It is, you're looking at an opening weekend game where you have Metcalf, Lockett, Bobo, JSN's hurt. And then you've got, if you go to a 4 receiver set, you're bringing Cody Thompson or Aesop Winston. God, I'm having a hard time with his name today. In as your fourth guy, and that was not expected. We thought we had a deeper wide receiver room than that, but still, I have the same 6 guys.
Okay, wow.
Tight end is has been pretty obvious since day one. Disley, Fant, and Parkinson, and that's the end of the list. So
yeah, I've got Tyler Mabry potentially making the 15-man practice squad. I've got him on my list for that.
Yeah.
Offensive tackles. I've got starters Charles Cross and Abe Lucas, backups Stone Forsythe and Jake Curran, practice squad Greg Island, and I've got them cutting Jalen McKenzie because I don't have enough room on my practice squad to potentially put him on there, at least initially anyway.
So I have McKenzie on the practice squad.
But we have a disagreement.
Yay! And it's about the 15th man on the practice squad. For the backups on the offensive line, you did it as tackles. So at guard, I've got Damian Lewis, Phil Haynes, Anthony Bradford on there, and then
Jake Curran kind of goes in between.
Yep. And so does Oluwatimi / Evan Brown, who make it as center. Both of them can do stuff on the interior as well. So I've got nine guys making the roster, and I added Randolph as a practice squad guy at guard.
I did not. Yeah, so off of my offensive guys, I've got Ehlers, Thompson, Lindsey, Landers, Cade Johnson, Mabry, and Island on the practice squad. So that's 7 for those counting.
Yeah, I don't have Mabry. I have Randolph and McKenzie, so I have 8.
So let's go to the defensive side. This is where things, I think, get a little bit more interesting as far as the conversation is concerned. Let's start at nose tackle. I've got Jerron Reed as the starter with Cameron Young as the backup. Also, Miles Adams could be there as well. At least that's the way they've got it. But Miles Adams is more of a defensive end for me.
Way too
and so
small
I've
to
got
be a nose.
I've got Matthew Gotel making the roster. So I've got Reed, Young, Gotel with Brian Monet on injured reserve, and Roderick Perry making the practice squad, along with. I mean, if we're going to combine defensive ends too, I've got Jacob Sykes also making the practice squad with Jones, Edwards, Morris, and Adams making.
Sykes played nose, whereas Adams played defensive end. No matter what they're listed on the official roster, that's where they lined up and got all the reps. So I've got Reed and Young making the roster. I've got Sykes and Gotel both on the practice squad with Monet on injured reserve. The idea there is I know that Young is banged up and may not play, but one of those two, Sykes and Gotel, will just be elevated off the practice squad for week 1.
Yeah, I've got a total of 7 defensive linemen.
I have 6, which made life really. It's going to make week 1 interesting, but I still think because you can elevate a couple of guys off the practice squad for the game and then just have them revert back down. That gives me a spot for guys like Sykes and Gotel.
Interesting. I'm going to see how that impacts your roster here going forward. Okay. So I've got 7 of those guys on my defensive line. How about edge players, outside linebackers, Keith?
Well, we didn't do defensive end.
Oh, I kind of threw him in there.
Jones,
Edwards, Mike Morris, Miles Adams.
Yeah, those are the same 4. I've only got 6 defensive linemen, which is scary. Okay, outside linebacker. I
added Gotel to the initial 53. We'll see how that goes.
At outside linebacker, edge guys, I've got 6. I've got Nuwasu Amafe, Taylor Hall, Bell, and Smith.
Okay, so I've got 5.
But you don't have Levi Bell.
Correct. So I have Bell on the practice squad, and so that's my difference.
Yep. And he was the guy that went back and forth.
I think he deserves to be on the 53, but I'm playing a numbers game here, and he's the odd man out so far.
Yeah, so I went back and forth. I agree with you. It might be a case where he's the odd man out, and they keep Gutell. He would
because
be my
Cameron
first.
Young has not been able to get on the field yet.
Yeah, and then if they end up having a roster spot because of someone else going to IR, then he would come back.
Yes,
and I would put him on the practice squad easy.
I agree with that.
But I don't know if he makes it to the practice squad and isn't claimed by someone else, which is why I left him on the roster.
I think he's going to be able to make it through because he's undersized, which makes him then a specialist in the NFL on game day. Now, he's been looking great against second and third string guys when he's been in on these games. And a guy like that, I think, unproven and not spectacular, he's a workhorse. He's a guy that shows up. He's a great practice guy. They love him. But I think that's why he does stick around on the practice squad, but just not on the 53. All right. Off the ball linebackers, inside linebackers, Bobby Wagner, Jordan Brooks. Jordan Brooks, reported by Pete Carroll, expected to be ready week 1, which is amazing. Devin Bush.
Practicing with the team at full speed, not doing side drills, but actually out there on the field. So he's ready to go.
Great news at that position, by the way. Devin Bush had that concussion, but he's on my roster initially. And then I've got Nick Bellore, who's a no man's land player. I've got him, slotted here to count on my 53. And then I've got John Radigan, Ben Burkervin, and Patrick O'Connell onto my practice squad with Vi Jones on IR.
Yep. I am the same, and I'm not happy with it because with Bush out with the concussion, Brooks coming back, hasn't played in the preseason. That leaves you with Wagner, a couple of guys that are, uncertain as far as injury, and Nick Bellore.
Yeah, that's why I think eventually, if Bush goes to IR for 4 weeks, O'Connell comes back.
Yeah, O'Connell over Radigan is my pick too. For that, I don't know if they put Bush on IR because concussions usually aren't that long, and if they are, it tends to be unexpected. And so I think they would keep those guys. It's more they would need to find room elsewhere to get a guy like O'Connell up, and they probably will just elevate him off the practice squad for week 1 if Brooks and Bush are still iffy.
Yeah, you could, if you needed to, you could possibly get away with cutting Miles Adams or Gutell for the short term, bring O'Connell back up. Yeah, kind of play around with the roster that way.
Well, you don't even have to drop a guy and bring him up. You can elevate a couple of guys each game off the practice squad and play them, and then they just revert back. But once you do it twice, you can't do it again unless you put them on the roster. So I think that O'Connell and Gutell would probably be those guys in week 1.
So this is kind of where it gets interesting to me, is with the defensive back room.
It gets really
I ended
hard.
up working it out in my mind before the show, and I'm looking at my list going, what do I do here? I'll just list it out. Quandre Diggs, Julian Love, Jamal Adams, Jonathan Sutherland, Kobe Bryant are my safeties. I have 5 of them. I initially had 4. It just didn't work out for me. Having Kobe Bryant there as a safety, but also being able to play a slot helped me define this room a little better. So that actually worked out. I've got Jerick Reed getting cut. There's going to be some people out there that do not agree with me. Sometimes I don't agree with myself. This is one of those players that's real fringy, along with Patrick O'Connell, Levi Bell, Jacob Sykes. There's a couple other guys. The
other guy you're cutting is Blount.
Yeah, I've got him on IR.
So I've got Reed and Blount both on. You're just going straight to IR.
Straight to IR with Joey Blount. Yeah, I'm not messing around. He hasn't been able to stay healthy in the preseason. He seems to be getting hurt, and this shoulder injury, who knows? And
I don't know. He looked really good before the injury. I've got him on the practice squad along with Reed.
It's possible that he goes to the practice squad. I just didn't have a spot for him because we can go over the practice squad, in a whole list here in just a minute. But, yeah. So we've both got the same amount of guys then.
Yep. Well, yep. At safety, we have the same 5 guys.
Okay.
And then at corner, Treek Woolen, Michael Jackson, Trey Brown, Devin Witherspoon, Artie Burns.
Yep. I've got Artie Burns on the roster. Yesterday, I texted you. I said he was off, and I had him on my practice squad, and I changed my mind.
He wouldn't make it to the practice squad. He's been consistently good all preseason. That's a lot of tape.
True.
There's a lot of tape that says he is in good form. I have him making the roster, but I also have him highlighted as a unique color because mine's color coded.
Mine too.
His unique color is they trade Artie Burns to someone who needs a corner. And if they do that, that opens up a roster spot for someone else. And I would say
they could do that with Artie Burns. They could also do that with Mike Jackson.
That's also true. I just think that Artie Burns, with his experience and his, years with the Bears and I think he has more value, especially since his contract is that of, league minimum. He has value to another team. And so I think that he would be the guy that gets traded. And if they do that, what I have is Kobe Bryant, then I list at a corner instead of at safety, and I bring Reed. And he doesn't get cut. So that would still leave me with 10 defensive backs, 5 and 5.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So we're mostly agreed there.
26 defense, 24 offense. Nick Ballore is also the fullback. So if you wanted to list him there, it would be 25 and 25. It's fine.
Agreed. Now you got the same exact thing, 24 and 26, 3 special teams, obviously. So let's build that. Let's build this practice squad list so we can put it aside, and then let's talk about some unique things about what we did. I've got, I think I mentioned 7 on the offense. I've got Ehlers, Sadodrick, Thompson, Tyjon Lindsey, Matt Landers, and they do Lindsey mostly for his special teams ability and return ability, just in case. Matt Landers, Cade Johnson, Tyler Mabry, Greg Island. That's my 7 on offense. My 8 on defense is Roderick Perry, Jacob Sykes, Levi Bell, Joshua Jogo, John Radigan, Ben Burkervin, Patrick O'Connell, and Jerick Reed.
Okay, I've got Ehlers, Thompson, receivers Johnson, Lindy, and Landers, guard Randolph, and tackles Island and McKenzie, giving me 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 on offense. On defense, I've got Sykes and Gotel, Radigan and O'Connell, Reed and Blount as my 6 defenders. You'll notice the lack of a Ben Burkervin there.
No Bell, Levi Bell.
Levi Bell made my roster.
Oh, okay.
Which again, which I'm not sold on. I could easily see Bell on the practice squad and Gotel making the roster, or Bell on the practice squad and O'Connell making the roster. But yeah, those are my 6 on defense, which actually gives me an open spot. Because originally I had Derek Young on the roster and not on IR, and then I moved him, and I never refilled that spot. So, yeah, there's an open spot on my practice squad. So
interesting. So, guys,
maybe that's where that would be Ben Burkervin, who would be the next pickup on mine. So
yeah. So names of note that got cut off my roster include Malik Flowers, John Hall at wide receiver, Liam Ryan, Kendall Randolph, Joey Hunt on offense.
Hunt's injured. He would probably be cut, and then when he wasn't claimed, he would revert to IR.
Yeah.
But yeah, he isn't a consideration for the roster or the practice squad.
Yeah, and guys like Levi Bell, Radigan, Patrick O'Connell, Jerick Reed. There are going to be some fans that won't agree with those things, but you've also got to look at the entire roster in total and tell me which other guys you would rather have off the roster than those guys on. So it's just one of those things.
So you think Reed doesn't make the practice squad?
I think he makes the practice squad. I'm just saying those are my cuts. Those are my cuts. And then
when
those guys are going to be on the practice squad, but they could get
when
picked
you were
off.
Saying
I mean,
players of note, and then you listed a couple of wide receivers that are not of note. I was confused. Because I don't think Flowers or
they brought Flowers on specifically for his return ability, and he was out there.
True. They brought a guy in who could handle responsibilities in a preseason game, so guys that can make the team don't get hurt. And him and John Hall aren't they're camp bodies.
Agreed.
So that's why
But I do see, a guy like Jerick Reed come back up onto the roster, off the practice squad initially, and have the team use the IR designation on a couple of players that aren't going to be ready, in the first 4 or 5 weeks, but they want on the roster. So that could include guys like Kenny McIntosh. It could include, I think Njigba's ready to go, but you never know where he's at. They kind of protect that information this time of the year. So
the reports yesterday was that he's back, he's running, he's working hard. He doesn't want his conditioning to drop because he expects to be back for week 1. And so
Witherspoon's in the same bucket too. I think he's back as well. All reports are indicating he's back at practice this week. So we'll see.
It's to me like offense didn't really have a lot of those guys except for McIntosh. And then I don't know if you go into a game with 3 backs. I think you bring Thompson up, but you might elevate him off the practice squad as a game day designation and not necessarily onto the roster in order to bring back someone else.
Yeah. Cameron Young would be another player, hasn't played a lick in preseason. He could revert to IR, short-term IR, and then have a spot.
Yep, and then a guy like Gotel actually gets on the physical roster because otherwise you'd have one nose tackle. I
had him make my initial roster, but yeah, I agree with you on that.
But yeah, so in yours it might be Sykes,
yes,
or a guy like that.
Yeah, correct. Or Levi Bell.
Hall is an option to end up starting on the 53 and bouncing to IR because of his shoulder strain. And if that happened, I think in yours you'd bring Bell back. In mine, I would bring Patrick O'Connell over.
Yeah. Yeah, because I do honestly believe that at the end of the day, by the end of business on Wednesday, players like Levi Bell, Patrick O'Connell, Jerick Reed are back on the roster, and guys like Mike Morris, potentially McIntosh, Derek Hall are on IR.
The thing is that with if Morris is the guy, right? We already talked about Cameron Young being on. How many defensive linemen do you have? Right. I have 6 defensive linemen making the initial 53. There's going to be movement, and 2 of those guys are then going to IR after 24 hours.
Yeah, that's why I don't think the team is done there, and we've talked about this for like ages now. It seems.
Yeah.
I do believe that we're very weak there, and if injury is going to impact that at all, with guys like Mike Morris, or Cameron Young being gone for any amount of time, the team's going to have to go out and get somebody. And if they're not completely happy with Jacob Sykes and Roderick Perry, they're going to have to go find players off.
Roderick Perry didn't even make my practice squad. That's how impressed I was with him.
He's on mine only because the position is so weak and I needed to hold that spot. It's either going to be him or somebody else.
Yeah.
Because they're going to have defensive tackles on the practice squad just because this line is so weak.
I put Gutell and Sykes on there, but they're both nose tackles. They're not really defensive ends. And I don't have a defensive end on my practice squad because I was unimpressed with Roderick Perry. And I think if they have one, it's because they brought in someone off another team.
Yes. Yeah. And so when you talk about the trade of Artie Burns or Mike Jackson, it's for a defensive tackle.
Or it's for a draft pick and a separate trade for a defensive tackle.
Yeah. I would be shocked if the team went into the first game without a defensive tackle on this roster that we currently do not have. But I've seen stranger things. I mean, the team feels strongly about Jaron Reed and Dre Jones and Mario Edwards and Mike Morris, guys that can kind of slip and slide back and forth along the defensive line. I just think it's a mistake. I don't agree with it. I think that it showed up yesterday a little bit in the game where we couldn't stop the run. You know, I thought for sure that the Green Bay Packers were going to end up running 200 yards against us. It was just not good. And granted,
Jones, Edward, and Reed didn't play.
I understand, but I'm just talking backup wise. The
Neither
depth,
did Morris
we are not
Young.
able to show enough there to even make the roster.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's concerning to me that you go in with Jaron Reed, Dre Jones, Mario Edwards as your three defensive tackles, and that's pretty light. There's not a guy on there that's much over 310, if.
Mm-hmm.
And stopping the run is not a priority if you line those guys up.
Well, I've only got 6 defensive linemen on the roster. 5 of them did not play yesterday, so I don't really care that much about whether or not they could stop the run against the Packers starters. Because you had Adams is the only rostered defensive lineman playing against the Packers starters.
Oh, I understand that, Keith.
So
but we both know this is an issue beyond what you're saying.
Yep.
Those 5 that didn't play are still lightweight guys defending the run. They just are.
I think that Sykes or Gutell. I think Gutell. He may not make the 53.
That's why Gutell makes the roster for me.
See, he may not make the 53, but he will be in uniform for week 1.
He's 341 pounds, and he's the only guy over 310 on this roster.
He is 341 pounds and beat a double team where he had 2 people on him, and he split the double team to make a tackle for loss in the backfield. There were a couple other things that he did in that game that I was actually impressed with.
Me too.
A point where not having him on my roster was mostly because I find me a defensive back that I could cut. And then I wasn't sure that Levi Bell would make it to the practice squad, so I stuck him in there. But the Levi Bell, Gotell question for me, I went back and forth and back and forth on it. And
I think
the last time before I closed my computer and said I'm done for the night, had Bell and Gotell off. But honestly, it could have.
You nailed it.
If I had stopped working 30 seconds before, I would have had Gutell on and Bell off. So
yeah, you nailed my dilemma as well. I've got 2 different rosters up, one with the full 90 man and one with the 53 plus practice squad. And Matthew Gotell didn't make my initial cut down, and Levi Bell is on my roster. And that changed after this game, because Gotell, I think, looked good. I don't have a problem putting him on the 53. But when you take a look at the weakness overall on the defensive line, I had to. I had no choice but to put him on there. Now, it might be Gotell, or it might be somebody else off the 1,000 other cuts that are coming on Tuesday. But that spot is for a player, because we can't go into the season. Cameron Young hasn't played any at all. Don't know what we have in him. And you've got Jaron Reed. Brian Monet is going on to IR. Austin Faolu is already on IR essentially, and so that's it. So Gotel had to make the roster in my estimation.
Yeah,
and Levi, and that was at the expense of Levi Bell.
Yep, and I've got Gotel on the practice squad with the idea that someone's going to IR after being on the roster for 24 hours, and Gotel would come up. So, but yeah, I honestly, there's.
So how do you feel overall?
Overall, I'm okay. There's some inside linebacker still gives me a lot of stress because you've got 3 players and 2 of which are not fully healthy.
It doesn't give me a lot of stress. Can I address that just really quick? It doesn't give me a lot of stress because I think the position is going to be on the field for 30% of the snaps at most. And I think that when you got a healthy Wagner and Brooks and Devin Bush is your backup, I'm okay with that. So I would imagine Devin Bush is only going to miss a week or whatever. I'm fine there. And Nick Ballure is not going to ever play there. And you've got a trio of guys on my practice squad that are off the ball linebackers in Radigan, Burkervin, and O'Connell. I'm fine at that position, I think. The defensive line. I mean, I've got 6, you've got 7, but you've got 2 players that are not healthy, have not been healthy, and are definite candidates to hit IR 24 hours after the roster is set. It's true.
There is so much
in either one of our scenarios
needed.
We're bringing in an outside defensive lineman after cuts. Yeah.
And this was what we knew going in, right? It was up front and middle linebacker that were the weakness, which means stopping the run was going to be a challenge.
Jordan Brooks solved that problem coming back.
Kind of.
Right.
I mean, he definitely Jordan Brooks solves the overall quality, but not necessarily the depth quantity. Because you're also looking at with these linebackers, these are guys that need to be key special teams players.
Yeah, that's why I don't have a problem, because I've got Radigan, Burkervin, and O'Connell. I'm fine with those guys being on the practice squad, being available, and playing special teams. There's 4 guys. There's 6 guys there between the practice squad and the active roster that play that position. That I'm fine. If O'Connell had to come in and play a game, I'm fine with that. He looked good. I think he's fast enough. Radigan, the same thing. He could place hold for a game if he had to. Burkervin's undersized, but I think he's still a guy that I would be comfortable. He's been in the defense now his 4th season. Guy that's at least competent. So I'm okay there. It's not the same at defensive tackle. I don't feel at all the same.
No. Couple other scenarios I wanted to get your opinion on. A team, I don't know if anyone lost their starter to injury this preseason, which is good, but let's say a team did lose their starter and they come asking for Drew Lock. Do you consider trading Lock and promoting Ehlers? Not
this year. No. I think the roster's too good to get rid of Lock, and not at quarterback. Behind Lock is okay. He made some fantastic throws. Throws. He also made some typical bad decisions that we've seen Lock make in the past, like predetermining where he's going to throw and almost throwing an interception yesterday. I think was a tell, but we don't have anybody else. Ehlers is not ready. He's not ready to go to be your primary backup into an NFL season when you've got a fringy Super Bowl or a fringy NFC Championship roster. I don't think you make that decision. How about you?
I don't. But I've heard that, people talking about that, because Ehlers is like a fan favorite. People love him. I don't see a guy that's NFL ready at this point.
Correct. Me too.
He's really fun, but that doesn't make him good. You know what I mean? I think he can get there. He gets out of his progressions way too easy and takes off. That's fun in the NFL, and he's picked up 76 yards on 15 carries in preseason.
but I guarantee that 76 yards and 15 carries in preseason translates to about 30 yards in the regular season, and he would kill drives. And so Drew Lock is a guy that could potentially win a game for you. He could also potentially lose a game, but I'd rather roll with that than anybody else right now, unless another quarterback from another team that we don't know about yet is going to get cut, becomes available, and the team sees the upside and jumps. I would be fine with that if they made that decision, but for now it's Drew Lock.
Yeah. The other spot was tight end. Do you like Tyler Mabry enough to possibly trade one of your 3 tight ends and then have Tyler Mabry land on the roster?
That's an interesting question. And you have to factor in all the other position groups, I think, into that. Tyler Mabry is a pretty decent blocking guy, but he's undersized. He's a willing participant to block, but so he's a better guy than Noah Fant for that. Noah Fant's got the value. I don't want to trade him though, because he's definitely a playmaker, especially if Jackson Smith-Njigba is going to be injured now and again. I think you keep a guy like Noah Fant for sure. Will Disley is a guy that you could trade across, but you're not going to get more than maybe a 4th round pick or possibly a rotation defensive tackle back in return. That's the potential. Colby Parkinson's a guy that you could live with or live without. He hasn't really shown completely yet, but he has that potential. And then he's also, all 3 of our tight ends this is the final year of their contracts, right? Or Disley is back, I think. Or maybe not. Maybe this is the final for Disley as well. I can't remember for sure. I'd have to go look. But so for me, Tyler Mabry hasn't shown me enough to supersede any one of those 3. But if the team made that decision, I would understand it because of how loaded we are at wide receiver, at least on paper. We became less loaded when Eskridge got suspended and
when Young got hurt.
Derek Young got hurt. But nonetheless, I could see that, but probably won't happen.
It isn't that Mabry would beat out Parkinson, because he hasn't, but it's that the drop from Parkinson to Mabry is small enough that the team values the draft pick that they would get more than that drop in talent.
Yeah, potentially, but you look at Parkinson's ability to be a red zone target and his height and catching ability. That would be tough. I would want something in return for sure.
Yeah.
What could you? Who of the trio that makes the roster? Who would you give up and for what?
Parkinson would be the one that I would consider, and he would probably require a 4th or a 5th round pick to get him off my roster. And I don't know if team's going to give you a 4th or a 5th round pick for him. And so it would be a consideration if someone came asking, but I don't know if anyone's going to come.
I think right now, with the way that our wide receiver room is, I think that Colby Parkinson provides more value than he's worth to any other team currently by staying on this roster.
What would it take to get Mike Jackson off the roster in your eyes? If another team came offering.
Wow. I would love to get a starting caliber defensive tackle, because I think Mike Jackson's going to be a starting caliber cornerback for a team if they come and get him. And so I would want a little bit more in return, value wise, than people might be thinking. I would want a player or, a 3rd round pick, I think, in return. But based on the fact that we do need a defensive tackle, it'd be nice for a swap. But if you can't get what you want, I would say Mike Jackson's probably going to be valued at like a 3rd round pick. And we have Trey Brown and we have Devin Witherspoon and we have Kobe Bryant that could play that spot. And Artie Burns. We're not hurting to find a replacement value guy there. In fact, I would argue Devin Witherspoon becomes the outside corner for this team, and Kobe Bryant reverts to the nickel.
Well, I would say that at least at the beginning of the year, Trey Brown has won the starting job opposite Woolen.
You could do that
and
too.
So I would start that way, and then or maybe even Artie Burns, because he's played really well. So one of those two guys starts opposite Woolen. Week 1. Jackson's interesting because he was really good last year. He had a really good off season, a really good start to camp, and has fallen off the last couple of weeks. Just had a really struggled against the Cowboys, and kind of struggled this week too. And so if you're another team and you're just looking at this preseason tape, what are you getting for him? If you trade for him, but if you are looking at last year's tape and that kind of stuff, and the guy that competes as hard as he does, like there's value there. I don't think you're going to get a defensive tackle simply because 1-for-1 trades just don't happen in the NFL. What would happen is it would be 2 trades. You would trade Jackson for a draft pick, and then you'd go find another draft pick, or you find a defensive tackle and you'd trade a draft pick for them. And if it ends up being similar, picks to get the guy you want, sure, that's right. Great, but it might not be. It might be, you get a fourth, but then you give up a third.
And I would be fine with that. I mean, right now I would give up whatever it takes to get a competent defensive tackle in here to pair with Jerron Reed, to allow this team to continue to win or add wins. I mean, you put Chris Jones in there, and that would be the most spectacular, splashy move that they could do. You put Chris Jones into this defense, and it automatically adds like a win or two to this team, and it's already an 11-win team.
I've got another name for you that might be more likely, and is almost as big of a splash. What would you say about DeForest Buckner?
Yeah, I think DeForest Buckner would be great. Yeah, see, you and I are on the same team with that. Yeah, you could do a DeForest Buckner. Obviously, you'd have to figure out a way to do it onto your salary cap. He's a 1-year deal. You'd probably want to extend him a couple of years to kind of manage that a little bit. There's another guy on their team at defensive tackle that you could potentially get in Grover Stewart. I've talked about him before in the past as a guy instead of DeForest Buckner. If the Colts want to keep Buckner, they're going to have to pay Buckner after next year, and they would. And Grover Stewart is also a 1-year deal, and he's at $10 million right now, and he's more of a run stuffer. DeForest Buckner is going to give you a little bit more diversity. Stewart is more of a true nose tackle, a run stuffer. He's not going to give you much in defending the run. I would be happy with either one of those, to be completely honest. And I think possibly one of those two is going to be made available to a team out there, because they're essentially on 1-year rentals right now with Indianapolis. Indianapolis is in complete rebuild mode, and they're not going to pay both those guys next year. So if you can get something for one of them this year, plus you've got Eric Johnson backing those up. Tavon Bryan is the other backup there. Adebawore out of the draft is the other backup to DeForest Buckner as well. So you've got some depth there, and you let one of those younger guys get some snaps this year on a rebuilding team, and you get what you can get for one of those guys. I could see that happening, actually.
Yeah, I mean they're the team that looks like they might be willing to unload a little bit here at the cut down, because everyone knows they're not going anywhere as far as like on the field, because they're rebuilding. They're starting over at quarterback, and their running back is holding out and doesn't want to play for them, so they really don't have much in the way of offense. And it's like, okay, like what else are you going to do? Are you really going to bring those guys in, pay them to play one year and get nothing for them? Or are you going to trade them and load up a little bit? So
yeah,
I could definitely
you've got depth behind them already on the roster,
Yeah.
So
I could see them making a move. The other team would be the Tennessee Titans. Looking at possibly them realizing that they're in a year of transition, and figuring out, okay, we need to find some way to speed this process along. I just don't go with them and see, oh, this is the guy you go and get. Jeffrey Simmons, maybe.
Yeah, well, Jeffrey
Naquan
Simmons.
Jones.
I mean, yes, I would do that deal in a heartbeat. Naquan Jones would be another guy.
Yeah, but would they trade those guys? Because those guys are young enough that they'll still be around once this rebuild is done. Maybe a guy like Jaleel Johnson won't be, but yeah, that doesn't move the needle for me. But yeah, like I was saying, those are the two teams that I would look at and be like, hey, are you interested in, doing that kind of stuff and seeing what happens?
Yeah. And I agree that you could see a mid-tier or even an upper-tier trade. We've seen John Schneider do it this time of the year, a couple, 2-3 different times to make the roster whole. And right now it's not that defensive tackle specifically.
Yeah. And the defensive line is it's not there. It really just isn't. And so they need to figure that part out.
They've really got 3 guys. If you take a look at it, Jerron Reed, Dre Jones, and Mario Edwards. And after that, it's just a bunch of guys right now. Mike Morris is there. He's got potential, but who knows? We both don't like Miles Adams very much. Cameron
Young and Mike Morris are both rookies with a ton of potential, but they're also both not healthy.
Right. Yeah. So I think something's got to give for sure. For sure. Okay. Anything else?
No, I think we're done.
It's a fun discussion.
Let's call it a show.
Yeah, it's a fun discussion, but you can kind of get carried away with the ins and outs of it. I think there's going to be some disappointment. There's going to be some initial disappointment out there with us, with everyone. When the cuts are announced, you're going to see some guys on there, maybe Artie Burns, maybe it's a guy like Jarek Reed or Tariq Smith that you thought that for sure they were going to make the roster and there was no question. And all of a sudden these guys are off. It doesn't mean it's final. Those guys could get picked off by another team. And if they do, good for them. But I think that more likely is they revert to a practice squad and we bring them back up. And,
or they don't even
you have a tendency to overvalue
sit there for
your own players too.
They sit there for a couple or 24 hours and then they get re-signed when the roster shuffle.
Yes.
So the Seahawks typically go into week 1 with 3 guys on the roster who were not in training camp with them. That's been the kind of the John Schneider average. Keep that in mind too.
Yeah, I agree.
I bet two of them could be defensive linemen. One of them could be a backup guard.
You would think. I mean, it's crazy how, everyone seems to agree on this. You go out and look at everyone in the Seahawks blogosphere and the beat writers and so forth. They're like, we're light here. We're light here. We need to do something. It's obvious. And then the team doesn't. So it's just one of those deals where they see the roster a certain way. They know how they're going to play it on game day. And they know the opponent. They've studied the opponents, in the first 4 or 5 weeks, and they know what they need when they need it. And sometimes those decisions just don't happen for whatever reason. So,
yeah, I mean, it comes down to, you look at week 1 is the Rams. The Rams aren't going to be good. They've still got some good players that could hurt you, but the overall quality of that roster is fairly poor. And maybe they go, you know what, we're good. We can give it another week, get Cameron Young and Morris healthy, and then we'll be fine.
Yes, it's entirely possible. All right, let's get out of here. It'll be fun and interesting a couple days ahead. So I would imagine everyone's going to be keenly watching the lists that come out. So find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk. You know what the show is, Seahawks Playbook Podcast. You can find that on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube. Hit that subscribe button. Make sure you're in your feed every week with our 2 or 3 shows a week. And now we're on to regular season games. We got a couple weeks to go, and then we'll be talking about games. So this is a great time of the year. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.